as Ellen cradled her newborn son in her arms, almost as if she could shield him from the news.
"Infants born so early often do."
"What will that mean for him?" she'd asked anxiously. "What can we do? There must be something."
"Not very much, I'm afraid."
The doctor had been kindly but dismissive.
"Don't let him exert himself too much or become too breathless. And be careful with even the common cold. It could so easily develop into pneumonia, which is, as I'm sure you know, so often fatal."
He'd glanced at the scrap of an infant, so beloved, so small.
"But try not to wrap him in cotton wool. That wouldn't be good for him either."
When Ellen and Lucas had taken him home, Ellen had been terrified to leave him for so much as a moment. She'd spent hours looming over his cradle, watching him breathe, willing him to be strong, his life all the more precious because the doctor had told her, with the same matter-of-factness he'd delivered his other painful prognosis, that due to the difficult delivery she was unlikely to have any more children. With 2-year-old Rosie to care for as well, she hadn't been able to indulge her concern for her small son as she might have wished. And in any case, Lucas had always been insistent that they give Jamie as normal a life as possible. 5 years on, Ellen still struggled with how much to let him do, torn between longing to keep him safe and wanting him to have the fun any little boy would long for. She had enough experience with weak lungs and sickbeds. Her own mother had died from a similar condition, but she'd lived in the sooty rail yards of Springburn, back in Glasgow where Ellen had been born. Little Jamie had had the advantage of the clean air of the countryside outside Toronto, at least as a baby. Now, living in New York, the air was not as fresh, but it certainly wasn't anything like what Ellen had experienced growing up. Clothes on the line coated with coal dust, the vegetables in the market stall covered with a layer of grime, every breath clogging in your lungs. Springburn felt a very long way from Manhattan, Ellen reflected as she gazed down tenderly at her young son. As she smoothed his sweat-dampened hair from his brow, she recalled the journey that had taken her across the ocean so many years ago. When she'd been only 13, Ellen had emigrated to Seaton, Vermont, with her father Douglas. They'd sailed past the elegant, blank-eyed Lady of Liberty, and Ellen had only just dodged being sent back for looking scrawny, terrified she'd be separated from her father forever, a fear which didn't come true then, but soon after. They'd had plans to live with family in Vermont, but after just a few weeks, Ellen's father had grown restless with life in a small town, and he'd set out for the rail yards of New Mexico, leaving Ellen with an aunt and uncle she'd barely known. But then she'd spent a summer on Amherst Island in Lake Ontario with Douglas's warm-hearted sister Rose and her husband Dial and their noisy, lovable brood of 5 children, and she found a home at last. For several years, Ellen had travelled between her beloved island in Ontario and Vermont before starting nursing school in Kingston, a practical job for a girl who had spent her childhood tending her mam in a sick room. That brief period seemed a long time ago too. After just a year in nursing school, an illness and what she'd thought was a broken heart had forced her to change her plans, and she'd returned to Glasgow to attend its prestigious School of Art, until the Great War had broken out, and she'd nursed on the front for 4 years, before returning to her beloved island and realising she'd been in love with her childhood friend all along. She and Lucas had been married now for over 8 happy years, and Ellen thanked God every day for the life she enjoyed, determined never to take its blessings for granted. Another cough shook Jamie's chest, and he glanced up at her with glazed eyes. "Sorry, Mama," he managed to get out. "You never need to be sorry, darling," Ellen returned, her tone both gentle and fierce as she touched his hot cheek. "Do you want to sleep in my dressing room again?" He nodded, looking even younger than his 5 years, and Ellen scooped up his slight frame as easily as she had when he'd been a baby. Within a few minutes, she had him settled on the cot in the dressing room, adjoining her and Lucas's bedroom. Her son smiled at her weakly as the cough rattled through his lungs, and then, after a few more minutes, he finally, thankfully, settled back into sleep, his breath still